So I am going to talk today about CSS Grid and layout, graphic design in the web. This is a topic I've been talking about for 5 years now. There are other videos that I've made or other conference talks that I've had. Many of you have been here. Hello again. Event Apart does these amazing recordings, and so you can watch them. I've conveniently put a playlist of them on my YouTube channel at youtube.com/layoutland, where you can quickly get to them. If you're interested in some of the things I'm talking about today and you get excited, you might want to watch these other videos or rewatch them or share them with your colleagues. And over the years, I've done a couple different things to try to explain what this moment is and what it means to have the tools that we have today and have the abilities that we have today. One year I did this official timeline of web page layout where I kind of showed artistically the differences between the different eras of page layout on the web and what it meant to be able to, how things changed very drastically over several eras, several moments. I also last year did a timeline of technology, the different underlying technology, and explained how that affected graphic design on the web. It really is all about these different CSS properties. The ones on the right are the ones that we've had around pretty much since the beginning of CSS. Some of them came a little bit later, but mostly those are the old ones. And the ones on the left are the newer ones. Some of them actually have been around for a long time, but others are brand new, or sort of, I guess if 3 years old is brand new, they're the brand new ones. But really, out of all of these, there are 4 main modes that your layout can be in, can switch from one to the other to the other. And so I'm not going to talk about a timeline today. I'm not going to talk about a big, high-level ideas of what's going on, other than just to say, it's amazing! It's a little kitten unicorn! It's an era, the time should get really, really excited. And then I'm just going to skip to how. The what, the why, the when. Let's just get to how. I'm going to assume that you want to get in on this new exciting feature. You need to know how. Stop trying to convince me, just show me how. So today I'm going to go through 3 examples. They are up right now at labs.jensimmons.com. If you scroll down a little bit, you'll see demos for 2019. And the last 3 are the ones that I'm going to talk about today. There's links to each stage as I go through them. Or you can follow along the URLs in the PDF that you have in front of you. These are the URLs. I'm going to go through them in pretty much this order. Number 7, number 6, and then number 8, I don't know, that's how it came out when I was organizing this talk. Clearly, I don't know where 1 through 5 went, but they're not in this talk anymore. So let's talk about something super practical. Let's talk about a header. Right? Most websites have some sort of header at the top. Many of them have headers that look like this, especially if their design is kind of old and boring, but you know. So we're going to start with the HTML. I'm a big believer in starting with HTML. Even if you're creating a style system or some other component-based system, or you're using React or whatever, at some point, no matter how that page gets built, it's built into HTML, and there's one HTML document that's delivered to the user's browser. And when you look at that document, you can see whether or not it's turning out very well. And you might need to go change different parts of the HTML and different parts of the underlying architecture that built that page. Maybe it's super complicated, maybe it's not super complicated. However it happened to get there, it's there, and we want to look at the HTML and see, is this result a good result? Does this give us what we want? And so here is the kind of classic markup that you might use for a header that's probably pretty good. Maybe it could use a few improvements for accessibility, but we're going to call it good enough. At first, the first thing is we've got this image, which is a microphone, a picture of a microphone, and we've wrapped it in a link to make it clickable. You click it and go back to the home page. There's the site name, which I've wrapped the site name in a link, and then I wrapped that inside an H1. That's the talking graphic design. I guess I'm making a podcast, a really boring podcast website. And then there's a navigation. We've got this nav element, and inside there we've got unordered list, and inside there we've got list items, and inside there we've got links. That's our structure, right? The whole thing is wrapped in a header element. And then we can see, one of the things I really want you to understand is that the relationship between those elements, what's a parent and what's a direct child, is pretty important. So you can see here that if we say that the header is the parent, then that A with the class of logo is the first child. The H1 with the class of site name is the second child. And the nav with the class of main menu is the third child. And all the rest of that stuff is grandchildren and great-grandchildren. That's a pretty important kind of relationship to understand that's going on. So let's take this HTML, and we'll call it version 7a, and we'll look at what do we get with no CSS whatsoever. This is the result. There's the layout for the page. That's what we get. And if we come in here to I'm in Firefox, I'm using the dev tools. Let's come in here to the inspector, and we can look at it, and we can see in this web inspector, we can see that structure that I was just talking about, and this relationship of parent and children, and you can kind of mouse over different parts, and you can see the blue is the content box, and the margins are in yellow, and any padding is in purple, and you can kind of look at, like, how is it that this is laid out? Why is there space between the headline and the stuff above it and below it? Oh, that's because there's a margin there. This is what is called flow layout, and this is this is sort of the default layout that you get. You don't get no layout when you don't put anything, no CSS. You get what's called, or what we should now start calling flow layout, the sort of default that never had a name because it was the only thing we could do. Now that we can do other things, Rachel and I and others have gone to calling this flow layout. It comes from CSS working group nerd terminology that gets floated around. So why should we care about this page with no CSS? Like, who uses a browser with no CSS? Well, anyone who's using any kind of like reader mode in their browsers. Firefox, Edge, and Safari all have reader modes. And you might have a large part of your audiences using reader modes and not know it, because it cannot be detected by something like, say, Google Analytics. Google Analytics is not going to report to you that 27% of your users are clicking the reader mode button and looking at your website with a reader mode. It's unmeasurable for good reasons, because otherwise, ad hacky, war, arms race. So it's invisible, but that doesn't mean nobody's using it. There could actually be quite a few people using it. And things like Firefox Listen, maybe, in the future. So let's look at, maybe you've been on a website like this, right? Like, who's tried to surf a website that just is like constantly popping up ads and videos and driving you crazy? If you click the reader mode button, all of that goes away, and it's just quiet and peaceful, and you can actually see the content without the animated GIFs and the crazy town stuff going on. Or here, Pocket. There's also another tool called Instapaper, and there's others where people can sort of grab the article and save it and read it later on their phone, read it later someplace else. Pocket also has this little headphone button, where if you click on the headphone button, you're going to listen. You can listen to the article. So you could be at work, trying your best not to procrastinate, taking all the articles that you know you shouldn't be reading, and shoving them all into Pocket, and then you jump in your car if you drive home, and you can listen to the articles on the drive home. And I also, it seems like we're on this trajectory where one day, one of these devices is going to wake up and start reading web pages aloud to people. There are plenty of people who already listen to web pages using screen readers and assistive technology. It's very likely that there will be many, many, many more. In fact, maybe most people will start listening to web content. So why not get ready today by using Semantic HTML? Semantic HTML gives you a way to say, that's a headline, that's a paragraph, that's a list, so that then those readers can voice those kinds of things appropriately, knowing kind of what they are. Also works great for SEO. I mean, we know this, right? Semantic HTML. So 7b, let's give it some visual styling. I've just added like some typography, a little bit of background colors on some things, and remove the little bullets from the bulleted list. Not much here, but there's the flow layout happening. And you can, I'm going to go in here and sort of look at, again, using the DevTools, look at exactly how is it. You can put the DevTools on the bottom. How is it that this layout is working? We can see that I've got like that padding all the way around the edge of the page. I've just got these things in flow content. I gave the image a width of 50 pixels so that it's always 50 pixels, even though intrinsically it's bigger than that. I made it small by using CSS. That could be our fallback layout, for example. If we're using some sort of technology that's not supported in every browser, that's the kind of thing that will happen in those browsers, fallback layout. So let's pretend that it's I don't know, 2007, and let's try to do floats. Here, I've put all this on one slide, so those of you with slides in front of you can kind of refer back to it if you want. But let's look at what we get if we come in here and we float the logo to the left. So that makes the things that came after it come, like, scoot up the page, right? And so we're going to put a little bit of a margin on the side of the image to make some space between the microphone and that title there. And then we'll float the navigation to the right, but oh, that's right, it's not going to go up. It's still going to, because the headline is in the way. So I guess we'll make the headline be 80%. Maybe that will work out if we cross our, but it's still, oh right, we gotta float the headline to the, who remembers this? Float the headline to the left. But now look at that, the blue background coming up, like, oh, we need that clear fix hack. Of course, now we can use what's called display flow root, just in time for no longer needing the clear fix hack. We have a solution built into CSS. But so this is the result that we get by using a float-based layout. This is what we've been doing, those of us who've been hand-coding layouts for the last, how many ever years it's been? I guess 14 years or so. There's a few things about it that aren't that great, though. Like, first of all, it's fragile. What happens if the navigation is bigger than we expected and the 80% doesn't work out? Like, that's scary. And also, things don't really look very good. They're sort of just vertically centered in sort of random ways, but I guess this is what we just live with because that's all we had. But the moral of the story, this is not what floats were designed to do, right? That's the only tool we had in our toolbox, so we used it, but that's not really what floats were designed to do. And it was, in fact, in this timeline, I mean, the entire hand-coded float layout era and the entire framework layout era with responsive web design, basically everything was float-based. So all the ideas about graphic design have been stuck within the constraints of what's possible with floats. Or here, fluid, fixed, and responsive. Basically, all of those eras were stuck inside float-based layouts. But let's use CSS Grid. Let's just jump ahead into the future, what you could do for the last 2.5 years. And let's use Grid. 7D. So we're going to come in here, and on the header element, remember that wrapper that goes around the other things in the HTML? We're going to put a display grid on here. This is the rest of the code as for reference. Let's look at it one by one. So come into the header, and we'll turn on display grid, which doesn't really seem to do a whole lot at first. I mean, actually, this catches me over and over again. I'm like, wait, that didn't do anything more exciting. By the way, in Firefox, you can come in here and click on that little icon that I was just pointing at, and you can end up with 3 panels across. So you have HTML, CSS, and then other stuff, which is super helpful. And then in that third panel, we've got this layout pane with the grid inspector, the CSS grid inspector. And so I've just turned it on so we can actually see what's happening, which is a huge help to understand. Oh, there's only one column, because by default, there's only going to be one column. We haven't told it to have more than one column. And the difference between having grid or not having grid is basically the margins before and after the unordered list and the H1 headline. With grid, they're collapsing so that that H1 margin and that UL margin are taking up the same amount of space. And when you add grid, there's no more margin collapsing, and so there's more space between those two things. That's really the only visual difference that we see, is this no more margin collapsing and then go back to having margin collapsing. That's confusing, though. I don't know what that is. That's frustrating. So yeah, here you can see it. Like, there's the margins. You can see in yellow how they're like taking up the same amount of space. They're like in the same space, right? But if we add display grid back in, then the margins stop collapsing. So let's just go in and just put margin 0 on both of those things. Get rid of the margins, because this is annoying. I don't know what's going on. So get rid of the margins, put display grid back on. You can see what we've got here. That's the layout we have so far. But then what we really want to do is have more than one column. So we're going to use grid template columns, and we're going to say 1FR, 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 which is basically telling the browser, hey, I have a template for you. It has to do with columns. I want to have 1, 1, 1. It makes 3 columns. They're all the same size. They're all going to hold whatever the content is that goes inside of them. And if there's more space, they're going to share that space, they're going to distribute that space among the 3 columns equally. So there's not enough space. They're going to be different sizes from each other, but as soon as there's enough space, it's going to go, you get 1 fraction of the available space, you get 1 fraction of the available extra space, and you get 1 fraction of the available extra space, which is why it looks like this. That icon, the headline, and the navigation elements are all different widths. They all have different measurements, but there's so much extra space that the browser just says, hey, you each get 1 fraction. And that's the layout we get, which it kind of looks okay. I mean, in some ways, it maybe looks better than what we had before, but we could make it better, though. So let's come in here, and we're going to go down to this navigation element, and we're going to text-align right. Old school text-align right. That starts to look a little bit better, right? Yeah, why not? That probably already sort of looks better than some things that were going on in 2007. But I don't know, the way that the extra space distributes itself, it seems sort of weird and awkward because it's giving the exact same amount to each of the 3 columns. So let's see what else we can do. We've got here the 3 FRs, as I described, but we maybe don't want them to each have 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Maybe what we want to do is make it more like this kind of layout, right? So how do we figure out what size to make these columns? If we went in here with some, put this in Photoshop, this is a PDF we got from our designers, you get your little marquee tool and you start measuring how many pixels there are, and a good designer maybe told you how many pixels it's supposed to be, but well, a good designer. And then you start, in responsive web design world, you just start doing these crazy formulas that Ethan taught us to do, and you get up with these crazy, I didn't put all the decimal points in here, but you can pretend 8, 75, and 18%. This is what we want to do, is have these percents. And we could, in fact, do something crazy and be like, well, let's just make that 8 FR, 75 FR, and 18 FR. Now, you could totally do that. There's nothing wrong with doing that. I don't know that that will get us the result that we want, but hey, let's try it. Let's see what happens. It's not like in the old days when everything was a hack, we definitely had bad practices and good practices. Today it feels like really all of this is equally good practice. It's just maybe not the result that you want. Here I'm using in Firefox, there's a responsive web design mode so that we can keep making the browser smaller and bigger, but we don't have to keep messing around with the dev tools. You can just kind of make the actual web page itself different sizes while leaving the whole browser window itself pretty big. So I just went in there and did 8 FR, 75 FR, 18 FR, and you can see sort of the result that we have. That starts to look like that drawing that I had earlier, a little bit, sort of. Maybe that's cool. But also, it's a little bit awkward, and it's a little awkward because of that space, right? So basically, each of those columns is getting that space, that icon is getting more space. And the same thing would happen if we were using %, where that column with the icon is growing and shrinking, even though the icon is staying the same size the whole time. Now, in the kind of classic responsive web design, I guess you're supposed to make the icon grow and shrink. So the icon would always be 100% of that 8% column. This is why we always did this, even with something like a logo, where maybe there's really no reason for the logo to grow and shrink, at least not at different big screens. Maybe by the time you get to mobile, you want to change it or something. But in general, does it make sense that that icon would grow and shrink always? I kind of want to just keep the logo the same size all the time. So what do you do about that column? I don't want that column to constantly get bigger. You can see here, I've done this drawing to kind of sort of emphasize that, hey, does it really make sense for this to be, all that blue, all that blue, the different amount of space that it's taking up? The same thing is happening with the navigation in green, right? You can see that when there's more space, that navigation column is getting bigger and smaller. And again, in responsive web design, that's the only tool we had, was to make everything be %, and everything had to grow and shrink at the same rate as each other. But with these new tools, with Grid, with Flexbox, with everything that's part of what we might call intrinsic web design, you can really make the layout be intrinsic to the content that we have and the design that we want to do, and not have to deal with kind of these things that maybe don't really work out so much. So instead, I'm going to come in here. Oh, one thing I wanted to point out is if you'll notice, one thing that's very different from percents is that those columns will never get too small to hold the content that's in them, right? So that navigation is never sticking out. That logo is never sticking out. That's the big difference between using FR units and using percents, is that when you get down to not having enough space, if you tell something, I want you to be 10%, it's going to measure the container that it's in, and then it's going to divide and give you 1/10 of that size. So if it's only 50 pixels, it's going to give you 5 pixels, because it's basic. You've told it, I want that length. Where with FR units, FR units is a way to say, I want you to distribute the extra space in this way, but if don't ever make it smaller than the content that's inside of it. If we switch, for example, let's switch that 875.18 from FR to percents. We're still in grid. This is the world of grid. But let's see the difference, right? So, okay, first of all, it sticks way out off the edge of the page. We've got overflow. It's like not fitting inside the viewport. Why is that? Well, because I can't do math. And 18 plus 75 plus 8 is not 100. It's 101. Right? Responsive with floats, that would have just broken everything. With grid, it dealt with the problem. But let me fix it, like reduce it down to 17%. Well, that's still not, it doesn't, okay, oh, there's the gap, right? And the gap is to M. It's not a percent, it's an M, which is kind of awesome. So let's get rid of the gap. Now it all fits into the viewport, into the containing block that it's in. But oh, look what's happening. Crashing. I think one of the reasons that people are so afraid of layout looking broken is because this is what happens with the old techniques, with layout, with floats, and with percents and everything. And we're sort of still deeply traumatized and afraid of, like, what if I open up I11? Will it look broken? I don't have time for that. Yeah, so don't use percents anymore if you can. If you can help it, use grid, don't use percents, and you can prevent stuff like this. The new tools are preventing these things right out of the box, because after whatever, I don't know, what was that, 27 years, people who invent the web figured out, like, oh, this is what we need. We need a tool that doesn't make things crash into each other. So what are we going to do about that space? Well, so really what we can do is define this track as max content, which basically says, would you please be the size of the content that's inside of you if the content itself is at the maximum size that it could possibly be? So for an image like this image has this fixed size on it of 50 pixels that's deeper inside a different part of the CSS. It's going to be 50, and the max content size is going to be 50, and the min content size is going to also be 50 pixels. But for like a headline or something, the min content size is when it's all like as small as possible, everything's wrapped, and the max content size is when everything's like not wrapped. So here, and in there on that video, I just switched it from 50 to 150, and you can see that the max content size grew when the content inside of it was bigger. So maybe this is in the middle of something other, so you're using this technique in a different part of your website, and you never really know how much content you have, and the column is just going to resize from template to template, page to page to page, according to the content that you have, by using max content. So you can see on this slide of the code, and for your reference, that there's like these different attempts. We've done these different ways of defining this. But why don't we go ahead and like put max content on here, we'll do max content on the first column, we'll do max content on the last column, and we'll do auto in the middle, so that those two columns are the size of the content that they need to be, and we'll just say auto, which is this weird thing that just means, I don't know quite what that means, but it's like do the magic, so it's automatically what I want it to be, and most of the time it is. And we get a layout that actually works. But let's make it better. Let's make it look more like, I don't know, what year is this, 2012? Let's take that navigation and lay it out as a line rather than a stack. This here. So how are we going to do this? We should look at the markup again to remind ourselves this is our markup. I've got here the items that are in that pink are grid items, and the grid container is the purple one. You know what that navigation probably really wants? Flexbox. Flexbox is the perfect kind of tool for something like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a bunch of flex items. We're going to make each of these list items into flex items, which means we're going to want a flex container just outside of those flex items on that unordered list. So we're nesting a grid formatting context inside, a Flexbox formatting context inside a grid formatting context. And this is this weird thing where people are like, should I use grid or should I use Flexbox? The answer is yes. You're going to use both of them. And this is how you're going to use both of them. You're going to use them like on different parts of the page, on different elements, on different nested formatting contexts. This is not at all like Bootstrap. This is not all like 960.js. It's not at all like all of the layout frameworks that were all float-based that came between 960.js and Bootstrap, right? Like we could probably list them. I don't know how many different ones did everyone in this room use, probably about 18 or 25 of them. They were all very similar, and they have our brains trained in a erase, erase, erase. That's not how it works anymore. It works like this. So you're basically picking a very specific place in the DOM, and you're saying, okay, put Flexbox here, and then the direct children are Flex items. Put grid here, and the direct children are grid items. So that's what we're going to do. Also, so let's go in here and let's do it. We'll come in here to this UL. We'll turn on display flex, which automatically turns that into a flex formatting context. It's going to automatically be in horizontal direction because that's what it is by default, and we're not going to change it. We can come and click on that little thing, and we've got the Firefox Flexbox inspector that's going to help us out by drawing some lines around things so we can kind of see what's going on. We're going to add a gap because you can add gaps in Flexbox now. Not in all browsers, though. It totally works in Firefox. I'm not sure where else it works. But we can, we would use margins, for better support across browsers. But for this demo, let's just use gaps. But then what's happening in that, it's not wrapping. That flex should be wrapping. I said flex wrap. And it's not wrapping, so why is it not wrapping? Oh, because we set that last column to max content. And so max content was saying, please make this content stretch to be as wide as it possibly can be, all the time, always. But that's not actually what we want. So we went back in, and I said max content, auto, and now that the Flexbox situation will start to wrap. When there's not enough room, the headline will start to wrap and the navigation will start to wrap. This is a good drawing of the difference between Flexbox and Grid. In the demo, I just used Flexbox on the navigation. We could use Grid on that navigation. There's no reason not to use Grid on the navigation. But these are the two different results that we would get. Where with Flexbox, it's going to calculate that first row. Once it starts wrapping, it will calculate the first row according to the Flexbox math fancy pants thing. And then it will start calculating the second row with no regard to what just happened on the first row. And then it will calculate the third row, and then it will calculate the fourth row. So you end up with this pattern that looks a little bit like a brick wall or something, where the word about it doesn't line up with the episodes in any sort of way. Where Grid doesn't do that. Grid is going to automatically put things into columns that go from one row to the next row. And so the episodes and about do line up. The word subscribe is going to determine where the end of that column is, and the word episodes is going to start based on where the word subscribe ended, even though they're in different rows. So there are quite a few. There are other differences between Flexbox and Grid, but this is one of the biggest ones. And I think one of the things that gets the most confusing, because sadly we've been abusing Flexbox. We wish we had Grid, and so we've been throwing widths at everything on Flex items that then sort of makes them, if you put a width on everything, it kind of makes this sort of fake column lining up thingy. But we should stop doing that. Don't do that anymore. Use Grid if you want that. So here's our layout, and we can see the results of that Flexbox and the Grid combined together. Here's the code for reference. But what if we want this layout? What if we want, I don't know, what year is this? I don't know. This is the grid that we want. So I'm going to change the grid itself that's on the header and change the layout. What we want is 2 columns in 2 rows, and we want the logo to be 2 rows high. So I'm going to go in here. This is no layout, and then we're going to add a grid. There's a display grid. Grid template columns, we're going to say min content and auto. You can see that Navigation wraps as much as it can possibly wrap because it's set to min content. I said grid template rows auto, even though I totally don't need to. That's exactly what it's going to do by default, but just so you can understand what's happening, I've articulated it explicitly for the rows to be set to auto and to auto. And then I put a gap on it. The gap in one direction is wider than the gap in the other direction, but that's not what I want. So what's happening there? Well, it's taking the first grid item, and it's automatically placing it in the first available cell. It's taking the second grid item, it's placing it in the second cell. It's taking the third grid item, and it's placing it in the third cell, which happens to be on the second row. But that's not really what I want. So I'm going to come in here and go to my grid item, and I'm going to start to say some things about the item. So the logo itself, I'm going to say grid row span 2, which means could you please be the height of 2 rows for me? And then everything else just magically falls into place. So why did that happen? Well, that happened because it took the logo. So the first one, right, it took the logo, put it in that first cell, it took the headline and put it in the second cell, and it took the navigation and put it into the third cell. But then when we said we want this to be 2 rows high, it put it into 2 rows high, like we said it. It took the next thing and automatically put it in the next available cell. And then it took the next thing and it put it in the next available cell. It's following the order in the DOM as it plays things out. You don't have to let that happen automatically, but this is the grid auto-placement algorithm doing its best to guess what you want. And since that's what we wanted, we'll just leave it at that. But then that word home, like the navigation and the microphone, that doesn't really line up. As a designer, that bothers me. I want things to line up. So I'm going to come in here to the navigation, and I'm going to add an align self-end, which basically says, please stop going to the top of your box. Please go to the bottom of your box. And just a little tweak, a little detail that makes things line up really nicely. And there's all sorts of other little details we could do in here that are available in Grid just to refine and polish everything. We could do this with floats, and then we could do it with Grid. We could let the float-based layout work for websites that don't support, or for browsers that don't support Grid, and then we could polish it up and make it look really good for the browsers that do support Grid. There's the code for that example. But let's get a little bit more creative, because this design's boring. We're stuck in the past. We could do writing mode vertical and switch the word sideways. That's kind of interesting, I guess. We could get rid of this microphone, because this is just dumb. It's a podcast, so I have to have a microphone, really? Like, that's this is all really kind of dumb. So let's get away from the past and thinking about how websites used to be. Let's go somewhere else. I spend a lot of time on YouTube because I have a YouTube channel and I'm trying to learn how to win at YouTube. And so one day YouTube said, hey, don't you want to watch the 15 hottest trends for 2019 graphic design? And I guess I said yes. And in this video, actually, there was this pretty great still that I paused on and screenshotted and looked at many times later, where I was like, ooh, I like those posters. I like something about those posters. What's going on with that? Can we use that to inspire a much better header? Let's see. So let's try this other example. In this case, I actually just simplified the header, and all it's got inside of it for the moment is this H1. It says graphic design. And then I'm going to throw at it some basic typography and color. I put a border of 8 pixels, a red border around the H1. I text align centered the H1. I put some margins on things. And then I'm going to add overflow wrap anywhere, which is a weird thing that we don't usually talk about, but that's a thing. It's well supported. So this is what we get by default, right? So the word graphic design is set in a fixed size, font size, and the box is the width of its containing block with some margins around it, but you're going to end up with overflow, because what's the browser going to do when it doesn't fit? Well, then when I add overflow wrap anywhere, we're basically saying, hey, don't worry about, just wrap. Anytime, anywhere, wrap anywhere you want. And a lot of that doesn't really work, but some of it's interesting. Maybe there's a way in which we would use that. We'd sort of never let it be bigger than a certain size or never smaller than a certain size, and we could do something kind of interesting with the headline. But let's look back at this, right? These letters aren't just breaking. The words aren't just breaking up. They're like the letters are floating all around the page. So how are we going to do that? So I need to be able to target each of the letters with some CSS, and there is no like nth character, nth letter pseudo class, sadly. I actually looked it up yesterday to be like, why isn't there? What's up with that? And like read some of the history of people requesting it and it not happening. But the biggest problem with this is that screen readers are going to read this as GRAF or PHIC, and that's not good. So I should throw some ARIA roles on here to basically say, hey, screen reader, ignore this crazy markup, and then add an ARIA label in there to say, here's the words I want you to say instead of this crazy thing that you're ignoring right now. But let's go ahead and try this anyway, even though it might be slightly evil. You can see there that I've got now each of the letters separated. I can mouse over them and hover over them and like see what's going on. I can put a display grid on them, and ooh, wait, what's that? Oh, right. By default, it's only going to have one column. We can see the lines to help us remember that. And then I'm going to put on here grid template columns, repeat 8, 1FR, which is just a different way of writing syntax that means 1FR 8 times. And the grid auto placement algorithm is going to take each one of those characters, and it's going to put 1 into each cell in order. When it runs out of 8 columns, it goes to the next row. It's going to make some rows up by itself. And then I can add numbers to this and see the numbers. I can turn on the numbers in the Firefox Grid Inspector. So this is going to help us actually see what's going on with these numbers. The numbers in grid mean the lines. If you've used a framework for layout from the past, you might have used a lot of numbers. Those numbers were like the numbers for the columns. That can get confusing to have to sort of switch your mental model and remember that the numbers are numbering the lines. So that's a little bit interesting. The letters are spaced out by the grid, and they kind of stack right directly on top of each other instead of being kerned the way or whatever, the way they normally would with typography, the font. But what we really want to do is start spreading them all around the page, right? So how do we do that? Well, we do that by writing a little bit of code for each letter and telling it, I would like you to be at this particular column. I want you to start at line 2 and start at line 1 and start at line 3 and start at line. So here's, let's dig into this one. I just picked the H. And right there it says grid column 4, which means start at line 4, and it's just going to span 1 by default. And so we can count over 1, 2, 3, 4. You can see the H, and then the other direction, in the row direction, is 1, 2. So that is starting at line 4, column line 4, and starting at row line 2. And then you can just change it. So change it to 5, 6, 7, change the row number from 2, 3, 4, 5. Right? So those numbers are basically saying, I want you to be here, I want you to be here, I want you to be here, I want you to be here. You can go, things can end up in a different order than the original DOM order, which is dangerous, but can be really useful. And so you just then do this for each and every letter. So now that we've got something more interesting for the site name, what do we want to do? Let's see what else we might be able to do with the rest of the header. One of the reasons that these are so interesting is the photos. Like if you look at the one that's on the top row, second from the right, I think that's especially interesting with all those photographs overlaying over top of each other, overlap, which is something I'll show you a little bit that Grid can do. So let's add an image, and let's add the navigation back in. So I've got now header with an H1 all split into these spans. I've got a navigation with an unordered list inside of it. It's the same navigation that we just were using a moment ago. I've added an empty div with a class of red box, also slightly evil. I probably should redo this example and not use an empty div and use a pseudo element like Eric was talking about. I could use a before on the header, and that would kind of create the element that I need to put the box on. And then I've got this image. And this is the design that I came up with. Very much just like looking at those images from that YouTube video. So how is this done? Well, there's all the lines, right? I've got this kind of complicated grid defined. You can see it here where the first column is 0, the second column is max content, 5 RAM, auto, and then the rows are 1.5 RAM, 50 pixels, min content, auto, auto. I didn't know that that's what I wanted to do ahead of time. I don't know Grid that well. I just experimented and played until I figured out I got something that I liked. And then you can see here, so I took this first item, the H1, and I basically told it to be on grid column 1 to 3. So this one's spanning, you say 1/3, and it's spanning across 2 columns. It starts on line 1, and it goes to line 3, which means it goes across 2 columns, and then goes from row line 1 to row line 5. This is going to run from column line 3 to 5. It's going to start at grid row 3, and I didn't say anything else, which just means, hey, go ahead and span 1 of these. I also have a vertical RL on it, which is why all the words are turned sideways. I've got this red box, which is separate. I took the red box off of the header element, and I made it separate so that I could make it overlap with some of those letters more easily. And I placed it using grid row and grid column. And then I took this image, and I said, hey, this is where I want you to be. I want you to be on this line, from this line to this line, this line to this line. And I put a mixed blend mode of overlay over top of it. And there's my layout. I get to actually just define rows and columns and tell everything where to be. Completely way easier than anything we've done in the past. And then I guess it's responsive. I guess it depends on how do you define responsive web design. If you define it as, hey, we want this to take up more and less space as there's more and less space available, then it totally is. If you define responsive as you need to use a bunch of floats with some percent-based widths and some something, everything has to morph equally, well, then it's not responsive web design at all, because the navigation stretches and everything else stays the same size, stays still, which works really well from all the way wide to about that wide. It doesn't really work it doesn't get any smaller. So I would need to use a breakpoint and switch to some other kind of layout in order to deal with anything smaller than this size, right? But it's a nice little example. So here we are in the land of kitten unicorns floating around in a little yellow box. Like, isn't it awesome? Isn't it totally the best thing ever? This is what my Twitter feed looks like, by the way. If you've ever wondered what it's like to be me, it's just this all day. But what about Internet Explorer? Yes, Internet Explorer. So here's the deal, though. I was looking at this last night again. Unprefixed. If we do not count the prefixed version of Grid that is in IE 10 and 11, which, by the way, there is a version of Grid in IE 10 and 11 that has prefixes that you can totally use that doesn't necessarily work the same way as what I just described, but is also very powerful. Well, let's pretend for a moment that doesn't exist. The global stats, the ones that are listed on Can I Use, which actually come from Stats Counter, which are actually totally wrong because no one has real stats. All the stats are not right, but they're the closest that we have, so we'll pretend for a moment. Also, it's global, and I know global is not the same thing as you and your team. This is not you and your team. This is the planet Earth. Unprefixed, 91% support for CSS Grid. It shipped 2.5 years ago. IE, all of them, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11 are 2% globally, not you, globally. But here's the other thing that we don't talk about enough. Why, I don't know, white supremacy. 7% is not IE that doesn't have Grid. Who is that? Opera Mini, BlackBerry, QQ, and Badu browsers. Those are really important browsers globally. They have huge market shares. They collectively have 3.5 times the size of the market share of all the versions of Internet Explorer. Not you, not your team, the planet Earth, with the bad stats from the Stats Counter people. So Opera Mini, BlackBerry, QQ browser, and Badu browser, they're a big deal, especially in certain markets for certain projects. We should talk more about that. What do you do about these other browsers? It's not just IE, it's all the browsers that don't support Grid. Yes, you should think about what happens on your website that uses fancy new technology that's not equally distributed among all computers, devices, network connections, right? You should think about that. Even if your QA department doesn't make you, if you're a front-end developer, you could still do a good job anyway. You could still totally think about it anyway. How do you do it with CSS Grid? Well, you can use a feature query. You can basically say, hey, I have some code for everybody. It's got some margins and some floats maybe and some stuff in it. And then if you know Grid, then I want you to do this other stuff. Let's take those margins off, because you don't need them, because you're doing grid. And we could take the floats off, but you don't even actually have to take the floats off, because they just fall off. If you try to float a grid item, grid just goes, yeah, whatever, we're not doing that. And it just falls off. So you can write code that works in the browsers that have grid and in the browsers that don't have grid at the same time. It's not twice as much work. It's not 2 layouts. Try it. You'll realize that actually it's not nearly as hard as you might imagine if you haven't had a chance to try this yet. So let's take grid off of this layout. Let's leave everything else in place. Well, this is what we get, right? This is not crashing into each other. This is not exploding computers. This is not browsers crashing. This is just like not really the layout we expected or wanted. It's functional. We could make some adjustments. Maybe the first thing we would do is change the DOM order to put the image first, and then the name, and then the navigation. And we could take off the vertical writing modes and only deliver that if you have CSS Grid. Maybe you could hide that red box unless you have CSS Grid, right? Already we'd start to have a better layout. We could just do a few more tweaks, and that's what these other browsers could get. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. It depends. It depends on the content. It depends on the website. I have a 7-part series up on YouTube called Resilient CSS, where I walk through exactly how to write progressively enhanced CSS that will work in all the browsers at the same time. When to use a feature query, when a feature query doesn't do the job, when you can just use an override, when you want to do something else. A lot of detail there to just exactly show you how to do it, because, hey, not everybody knows how to do it. So this is a tutorial on that. So let me show you one last example. I get these emails in my email inbox. I don't ever go to the Times talks in New York City, the city where I live, but I like looking at these emails because they're really pretty, especially the colors are amazing. And also, even though this is email and it's probably HTML, and I'm so sorry for the people who have to make these, the overlap, oh my gosh, overlap in digital, what is that? This little word talk, right, is overlapping this photo of Tiffany Haddish. So I wanted to know, like, can I do this? How would I do this in CSS Grid? So I started to reproduce this, which gets us to example 8a. Here's the markup for it. I've got a main. Inside my main, I've got an H1. I've got 2 images, and I've got an H2. And if you've realized, like, ooh, grid, ooh, she's probably going to do grid. Ooh, we'll put grid container on the main, and we'll make the children the way H1 and the 2 images in the H2. Those would be grid children, right? Like, this is how my brain, and hopefully your brain, will start thinking all the time. So I added a bunch of CSS, like fonts and background color and font style italic and text align right on the H2. And what do we get? So this is basically with almost no layout, just using defaults, just using flow layout. Images are inline by default, which I still find super mysterious, but that's why they're next to each other when there's enough space, because they're inline elements. This is not a great layout, but this is not a terrible layout. If this was a fallback layout, like maybe something. But then here we go. We get like this H1 with the head, with the margins on it, and the images, and I think the images, yeah. So let's look at version B. What happens if we start to add some fancier layout to it? The first thing I'm going to think about is columns. Like, how many columns do I need? Where do they go? My grid container, see that purple space around the edges of that? I decided to actually make the container be where the yellow is and let that extra purple space be maybe a margin on the outside of that container or something. We'll leave that extra purple space on the sides and above it, sort of outside of what we're about to do. And I'm thinking, I get out my whatever pixel ruler, and I'm thinking, well, maybe I'll use FR units, and I'll have 1FR, 3FR, 3FR, 1FR. I frequently start from this place, even though I'm pretty sure I'm not going to stay here, just because I just want to get stuff going, and that's like an easy way to get going. If we were going to do it in some sort of percents, then that's maybe what the percents would be, but and then rows, right? So where are we going to put the row lines? And if you see the kind of like overlapping thing, right? Like, so the talk filmmaking is going to start at a different row line than the photo of Ralph Lemon is going to end, right? So there's a little bit of sophistication going on in there. I'm going to number them. Sometimes I grab like a screen capture, like monosnap or whatever, and I just take a screen capture of something, and then I just draw really ugly lines, and then I just like draw really ugly numbers on them, or use an iPad and a tablet and just like quickly sketch over top of a design drawing or some sort of things just to get to then be able to refer to as a reference doc as I start to code. So this is a little bit fancier than I usually do, but this is the kind of thing that I would start to put together. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take that H1 element, and we're going to say, hey, I want you to go from grid column line 1 to column line 4, and from grid row line 1 to row line 2. It's going to place that headline in that space. Or we could say grid column 1 to 5, right? So there's a little of a nuanced decision, which maybe a really good designer would specify or think about, have a conversation with a developer, or maybe the designer didn't, and you just got this PDF in the email, and you're like, as a front-end developer, I don't know, should I go to line 4 or line 5? And the front-end developer is actually really finishing the design, because these designs cannot be figured out. A lot of this nuance, a lot of these details cannot be figured out in Photoshop or Sketch or Figma or InVision, or just switching from one of those programs to another doesn't give you the power that you need in order to do this kind of nuanced design. This kind of design and all the decisions that need to get made are really only going to be made in code, in CSS itself. So maybe the designers, maybe you're a designer who codes. Maybe your designers do code. Maybe only the front-end developers code, and then there's a conversation that needs to happen. Or maybe there's a handoff with the PDFs that come flying over the wall, and you're not allowed to talk to each other. But then the front-end developer is the person who's actually finishing the design, and finishing it by making little decisions like this. When is it going to wrap? Is it going to wrap when the words hit column line 5 or 4? Total nuance, but these are the kinds of things, this is where we can put our attention, instead of putting our attention on trying to figure out why our float's dropped. So then we take this image, and we're going to say, hey, you're going to go from column line 2 to 3, and row line 2 to 4. This is usually when I'm pretty confused, and I need my reference drawing to help me figure out what the numbers should be. Same thing with this image, row line 2 to 4, but the columns are going to go 1 to 3, 3 to 4, and then this little H2 headline, line 3 to line 5, line 3 to line 5. And then there's all the code that you write. I'm not going to talk through it because I just kind of did. Like, that's the mental model for the code that you'll be writing. And then let me also put on here images of max width 100%, right? They were just sort of fixed size. Let's go ahead and make them squishy and see what happens. This, again, remember, we've got 1 FR, 3 FR, 3 FR, and 1 FR. It's a little bit awkward, right? Talk filmmaking is not where I meant it to be. I'm not sure why it's up there. Images get kind of small really quickly. I don't really want there to be as much space on the sides of them because I want them to stay bigger longer. So this is where then I get in there and I start going, okay, let's get rid of the FRs. What am I going to do instead? I've got things in the right place. I can start figuring out what are the refinements I need to make in order to get the behavior that I want. So I come in here, I'm going to switch from 8B to 8C, and already it looks a little bit better. The images are kind of bigger. And what did I do? I think I put some kind of a align self end on that H2 talk filmmaking headline to make it align to the bottom of the row that it's in instead of aligning to the top of the row that it's in. And then I went in there and messed around. I left the first column as 1 FR. I made the last column be min content, which I actually don't have time to explain why this happens. But magically, it makes one of the columns grow and shrink at a different rate than the other one, so that one of them will stay wide for a long time while the other one gets smaller, which sort of makes it asymmetrical a lot of the time. I thought that might be interesting. And then I put the images, I gave them a min-max of 100 pixels to 400 pixels. So they stay pretty big at 400 pixels for as long as possible, but then when there's really no space left, then they start to shrink. And they shrink later than the 1 FR will shrink. It's sort of a way in which the space that's available gets distributed at different rates to different parts of the page itself. There's all these different possibilities when you define grid rows and grid columns. You can define a fixed length, like an M, a rem, a pixel length, a character unit, CH, viewport height or width units. You can say min content or max content. You can use a percent there are times when using percents is a really good idea. FR units, min-max statements, auto. A lot of different choices. We have all these different options. And I really do think one of the best ways to figure it out, because I can't just drop all this into your head in 60 minutes, is to just try something. Try some sort of random experiment. And go into the Firefox Grid Inspector and just start throwing random things at it. That's literally how I learn the things that I know. It's how I figured out how it behaves. I didn't memorize Rachel's books. I didn't read the whole grid auto-placement algorithm, because I did, but I didn't really understand huge chunks of it. So like I would learn better by just trying it. And there are lots of things that I discovered that I don't think are widely understood by even the people who invented grid, the way that things interplay with each other. I was like, why does it work that way? And then I go find out why. But I think the people who wrote the spec didn't realize that it was going to work that way. That excites me, like some sort of new frontier that we're exploring and playing and experimenting, and we don't know what best practices are yet. We don't know what's actually possible or not yet. I want to see us as an industry experiment in a way that we haven't in a very long time. And in order to shake up my own thinking and to get ideas, I like looking at lots of graphic design from outside the web, going back to kind of mid-century modern or graphic design canon, or just keeping my eyes out. And I think all of these are actually recent, or many of them are very recent examples, but they just have something in them that I look at any of these and I'm like, ooh, grid, ooh, writing modes, Flexbox, variable fonts, or these as well. There's just all sorts of ideas about overlapping and shapes and not having things be boxes. I think overlap could be super profound for us, and we've barely even scratched the surface. There's a couple demos that I made for you today, but then I didn't actually end up using them. So this is one of them. I just saw that beautiful image and was like, what does it mean for that to be responsive? Like, laying that out as a fixed width thing is pretty straightforward. Once you sort of know grid, it's not that hard, but what does it mean to make it flexible? What does it mean to make it intrinsically of itself? Should that image shrink and grow, or should it only shrink and grow sometimes? What kind of code do I want to write to make that happen? Or this image, also fairly predictable in the layout that it has, but maybe I was trying with this one to make it so that the image squishes, but instead of squishing width, that it had a squishy height. So that the height, like the amount of text would determine how big the box would be, and then the image would grow or shrink in its height in order to adjust to the text box. And I'm not sure that I nailed it yet. I feel like I'm not quite done with this demo yet. Or this one, I just wanted to troll Rachel by adding kitten photos and use some sort of diagonal and use overlap with clipped diagonal. Those boxes are overlapping with each other and they're clipped. So how do you do that in a way that's flexible and squishes and changes depending on how much space there is in the viewport? Or this, again, like not super hard. You know, you could just make this in Illustrator and export it as a big PDF and put it on a web page or PNG or something. But that's wrong. So like, how do you make it inherently be of the web, where the text is real text, where the thing squishes or shrinks or grows? Like, should that image, I think that I made that image a background image. Do we want it to kind of get clipped rather than shrinking? Because you can do that. You can have the image just stay big all the time. Why does the image need to shrink and grow? It's not responsive web design. Let's just let the image be the size that it is, and let's let things over. Maybe the two POTS design studio could have yellow backgrounds so that if it moves up and is over top of the image, there's like a yellow background. I don't know. Like, play around with it and see what happens. I've been playing around with things now for 5 years, putting them up on labs.jensimmons.com. You can go through and use the inspector. There's also links to code pens all over it. You can fork it on CodePen and play around with the code. I also have a lot of videos on YouTube where I describe some of these examples and how I built them or why I built them the way that I built them. Thanks very much.